I never expected love to find me in the most awkward moment of my life, but when it did, his family's jealousy became so toxic that they'd stop at nothing to tear us apart. What they didn't know was that karma had other plans, and the truth would destroy them all. So let me take you back to where it all began. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was treating myself. I'm serious. I needed it. For the past 5 years, I'd been pouring every ounce of my energy into my restaurant, built it from nothing, started in a small kitchen with 2 employees and a dream, and now I had a thriving business with loyal customers and a reputation I was genuinely proud of. But success comes with a price, you know? I was working 12-hour days, missing social events, and honestly, I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for me. My best friend finally staged an intervention and dragged me to this upscale spa resort about an hour outside the city. I resisted at first, but when I walked into that luxury hotel, something shifted inside me. The soft lighting, the sound of water features, the smell of lavender and eucalyptus. I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. I booked myself into the private spa suite. It was an indulgence I could barely justify, but I promised myself I deserved it. I spent the afternoon getting a massage, a facial, the whole treatment. By late afternoon, I was in absolute bliss. I made my way to the private shower suite attached to my spa room, ready to rinse off and sink into pure relaxation. The warm water was running, steam filling the space, and I was just stepping under the shower head when the door suddenly burst open. I literally screamed. There was a man standing there looking equally shocked, his mouth hanging open like he'd just walked into a horror movie. For a split second, we both froze. Then reality hit me. I was completely naked, and this stranger was staring right at me. I screamed again, covered myself as best I could, and honestly, I was ready to call security. But he wasn't some creep. He was apologizing frantically, backing out of the room, stammering about how he thought this was the men's spa suite and how his keycard must have been mixed up. I could hear the genuine embarrassment in his voice, and despite the mortification, something made me actually laugh. Not a polite laugh, a genuine from-your-belly laugh that surprised both of us. Once I composed myself and got dressed, I decided to report the mix-up to the front desk. But as I was heading out, I literally ran into him again in the hallway. He was standing there with a little girl, maybe 6 years old, holding her hand. He was mortified all over again, but this time I could see he was also trying not to laugh. His daughter looked at him confused and asked, "Why is Daddy's face so red?" That sealed it for me. This guy was genuine, had a sense of humor, and clearly adored his daughter. He introduced himself right there in the hallway. He was there for a special dad-daughter spa day, he explained. His name was Wonderful, and his vulnerability in that moment was almost endearing. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee downstairs to make up for the awkward encounter. I should have said no. I should have just taken the memory and moved on. But something in me, that part that had been dormant for 5 years while I built my empire, said yes. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into breakfast the next morning. And somehow, over the course of the next few weeks, this accidental meeting became the most intentional thing in my life. He was different from anyone I'd ever dated. He wasn't intimidated by my success. He didn't try to diminish it or make it about him. Instead, he celebrated it. He'd come to my restaurant on quiet nights and just watch me work. And there was something in his eyes that made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. He owned a successful bakery, had been running it for about 8 years. He told me stories about how he'd started it after his daughter's mother left, needing something to pour his pain into. He turned his heartbreak into something beautiful, into a business that employed 15 people and had a loyal customer base that drove 2 hours sometimes just to get his bread. We were careful at first. He didn't want to introduce me to his daughter too quickly, and I respected that. But when he finally did, something magical happened. She took to me immediately. We'd spend weekends baking together, her little hands covered in flour, both of us laughing when we inevitably made a mess. I found myself imagining a future I thought I'd put on hold indefinitely, a future with him, With her, with a life that wasn't just about work and ambition, it was terrifying and beautiful, and everything I didn't know I was missing. But then he started mentioning his family, his older brother who ran things in the family, his parents who were very traditional, very particular about how things should be done. I noticed something shift in his demeanor whenever he talked about them. He'd get quieter, more guarded. I asked him about it, and he brushed it off, saying they were just protective and would need time to adjust to the idea of him dating someone. We'd been together for about 3 months when he said he wanted me to meet them. I was nervous, but ready. I thought once they saw that I genuinely cared about him and his daughter, they'd warm up. I was so naive about how family dynamics could work. The dinner was at his parents' house, a beautiful, expensive place that screamed old money and careful decisions. The moment I walked in, I felt the temperature shift. His mother smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. His brother looked me up and down like I was an item at an auction he wasn't interested in bidding on. His father was polite but distant. During dinner, the questions started. Where was I from? What did my parents do? How serious was this getting? It felt less like curiosity and more like an interrogation. I answered everything honestly, shared my pride in my restaurant, talked about my goals. But with every answer, I watched their expressions grow cooler. After dinner, while he was in the kitchen with his mother, I excused myself to use the restroom. I was walking down the hallway when I heard his mother's voice coming from the study. I should have kept walking, I know I should have. But I heard my name, and I froze. His mother was talking to his brother, and what I heard changed everything. She was saying that they needed to handle this situation before it got out of hand, that I was too ambitious, too independent, and that I'd probably convince him to abandon family loyalty. But that wasn't even the worst part. His brother mentioned the bakery. He said something like, if he stays with her, he's going to think he's successful on his own. We need to get him to sell while we still have influence over the decision. There's a buyer who'll give us a good cut. My heart literally stopped. They weren't concerned about him. They were worried about controlling him. More specifically, they were worried about controlling his money. I stood there in that hallway, my entire body shaking, and I had to make a choice. Pretend I didn't hear anything, or tell him what I'd overheard. I walked back into that living room, and I looked at him laughing with his father about some childhood memory, and I knew I couldn't let this go. But I also knew that telling him would put him in an impossible position. I drove home that night in silence, my mind racing with what to do. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. His family started calling constantly. His mother had sudden health problems that needed his attention. His brother needed business advice. They started making comments about how he'd changed since dating me. Subtle things, but deadly. She's not really the settling down type, his mother would say when I wasn't there, but he'd tell me about it later. His brother made comments about how I was probably using him to expand my restaurant empire. The isolation was methodical. They weren't trying to break us up directly. They were trying to drive a wedge between us by poisoning his mind against me. And honestly, it was working. He started pulling away. When I mentioned that I'd noticed his family didn't seem to like me, he got defensive. He said I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. The arguments escalated. He'd side with his family on small things, and each time he did, I felt a piece of my heart break. My business started suffering because my focus was divided. I was stressed, anxious, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I caught him on the phone one night with his brother, and even though he was trying to keep his voice down, I heard his brother saying, "You need to end this. She's going to ruin you. Trust me." When I confronted him about it, he didn't even deny it. He just looked exhausted and said his brother was concerned, that's all. That's when the loneliness hit me hardest. Here I was, with a man I loved, with a little girl who called me by my first name and held my hand in public, but I'd never felt more alone, because he was choosing his family's voice over mine, and I couldn't compete with that. I didn't want to compete with that. Then, about a month into this painful limbo, I got a text from an unknown number. "I need to talk to you. It's about him and his family. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. Corner Cafe on 5th Street. It was his ex, the mother of his daughter. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. Walking into that cafe, I didn't know what to expect. She was already there, sitting in the back corner, looking anxious. She told me her name was a beautiful name, and as she started talking, I realized she was the missing piece to this puzzle. She said she'd left because she couldn't handle his family's control anymore. When she was with him, they'd constantly interfere, constantly question her motives, constantly try to undermine her relationship with him. His mother had even spread rumors about her being unfaithful, which turned out to be completely false. She said she reached a breaking point where she realized staying would damage both her and their daughter. So she left, but she stayed involved as their daughter's mother. What she told me next made my blood run cold. His family had forged documents years ago to gain control of the bakery's finances. They'd been embezzling money from it, making it look like the business was barely breaking even. But she had evidence. Before she left, she'd copied everything and hidden it in a safety deposit box. She gave me access to the box number and her authorization code. She told me this because she said she'd watched what was happening between me and him, and she recognized the pattern. She didn't want to see his daughter lose another person she loved because his family couldn't handle not having complete control. I left that cafe feeling like I'd entered a different reality. The jealousy I'd sensed was just the surface. Underneath was criminal activity. Underneath was systematic control through financial manipulation. I spent that evening going through the documents. Bank statements that didn't match what he thought he was making, transfers to accounts in his brother's name, forged signatures. It was all there. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about my relationship anymore. This was about justice. I drove to his apartment that night and laid it all out for him. I showed him every document. I told him everything I'd discovered. And watching his face as the truth sank in was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. Denial, anger, shame, guilt, it all washed over him in waves. He wanted to dismiss it, to protect his family, but he couldn't. The evidence was irrefutable. And then came the moment that broke me and healed me simultaneously. He admitted that he'd known something wasn't right. He'd suspected his family was manipulating finances, but he'd been too afraid to confront it. He'd convinced himself that the jealousy and control was just because they loved him. He'd made excuses for years. We sat in his kitchen until 3 a.m, and we made a decision together. We were going to report what we'd found to the authorities, not out of revenge, not out of spite, but because it was the right thing to do. He was terrified, but he was also ready. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, his family had no idea what was coming. They kept calling, kept trying to manipulate him, kept making their little comments and suggestions, but he'd finally seen them for what they were: thieves, controllers, people who saw their son not as a person to love, but as an asset to control and exploit. The police executed a warrant on his family's business and home. They found more than what we'd reported. They discovered that the fraud extended beyond just the bakery. It involved multiple businesses, multiple victims. His brother was arrested on fraud and embezzlement charges. His parents faced investigation as accomplices. The family's reputation in the business community was destroyed overnight. Their social circle abandoned them. The life they'd built on stolen money and lies came crashing down in a matter of weeks. His mother's sudden health problems mysteriously improved once the pressure was off. His father became a shell of himself, realizing how much of his identity had been wrapped up in their fraudulent success. And his brother? He's facing years in prison. But here's the thing about karma that nobody talks about. It doesn't feel like victory. When I watched his family's world collapse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad. Sad for what they'd become. Sad for the family he'd lost. Sad that it had to happen this way. But I also felt something else. Relief. Because finally, he was free. The healing wasn't instant. There was guilt on his part, anger, confusion about how his family could betray him like that. His relationship with his parents became strained. They weren't in prison, but they weren't forgiven either. He set firm boundaries. They could see their granddaughter, but only if they respected his relationship with me. And slowly, something beautiful began to emerge from the ashes. He started to heal. I started to heal. And most importantly, his daughter got to grow up with a father who was present, free from manipulation, and genuine. A year later, we opened a restaurant-bakery combo. It was my dream and his dream merged into one. His bakery items became the signature feature of my restaurant. The business thrived in ways we could have never imagined. We got married on a quiet beach, just the three of us and a few close friends. And one evening, while we were closing up the restaurant, his daughter tugged on my sleeve and asked me something that made me cry happy tears. She asked if she could start calling me Mom. Not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to. That's when I fully understood what karma really means. It's not about punishment for the guilty. It's about freedom for the innocent. His family's greed didn't destroy us. It saved us. Because in trying to control him and manipulate his future, they accidentally gave him the push he needed to find his own truth. And in that truth, he found me. And I found him. And together, we built something that no amount of family interference could ever touch. The universe has a way of protecting those with honest hearts. His family thought they could control his future. Instead, they destroyed their own. And the best part? They did it all by themselves. That's the story nobody told you. His family's jealousy didn't break us. It broke them. If you felt the power of that twist, smash that like button right now. Subscribe for more stories where karma comes full circle. And comment below, would you have stayed or walked away? Let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.